Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. Happy Thursday, June 1st, or maybe Friday, June 2nd, depending on where you are around the world. We're awfully glad you're here. Thanks for being here with us. It's an open forum today, but it's an internet open forum. All of our questions will come from the internet, and Jimmy Akin here to answer them. And this is a very special day for Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, the author of a whole bunch of different things. Jimmy Akin today celebrating his anniversary of coming here to Catholic Answers. Congratulations on this big day, Jimmy.
Thank you. Yeah, my report to work date was, by coincidence, this wasn't designed, but was June 1st, the feast of St. Justin Martyr, patron of apologists, which I've always viewed as providential. And it was June 1st of 1993. So since it's now 2023, that means I've been doing this for 30 years.
That is amazing. And the radio show turned 25 at the beginning of this year. So several the first years, no radio show. But did you do media like this? Like maybe it was recorded talks and stuff. Or how did your
Well, it initially I did a lot of correspondence.
Okay.
Because this was before the internet, and so the way that people the ways that people primarily had to reach us were by letter and by phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would answer a lot of people's questions by letter and by phone call. Eventually, we got the internet because that came out, and we were an early adopter, so we got Catholic.com.
Mm-hmm.
We also started the radio show after a few years. There was also public speaking, and there were occasional radio interviews and things like that, but we didn't have a regular radio show until we started Catholic Answers Live.
Are you our longest serving employee now, or is
Yes.
Jen Phelps? Oh,
Nope.
Jen
She
Phelps
came after me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, congratulations, Jimmy. 30 years. I mean, you must have been an apologist before you came here, but 30 years as a public apologist with Catholic Answers.
Yes. Yeah. And I did have training in apologetics before I came to Catholic Answers. My academic background is in philosophy, and one of the philosophical subjects I focused on was, philosophy of religion. And so that involved apologetics. Also, I took a lot of medieval philosophy, so that exposed me to a lot of Catholic theology. I also studied epistemology and metaphysics and things like that. But I had also self-training in apologetics, including because of the fact I became Catholic. I had been on a ministerial track in the Protestant community, but I had made studying the theologies of all different branches of Christendom. And eventually I concluded I need to give Catholicism a closer look. But by that point, I had years of, theological training in Protestant thought. And so I had to review all of the categories of systematic theology with an open mind to the Catholic position and fight through the arguments, which understanding of this area is better. And so I had a lot of arguments to unlearn, and
Oh, yeah.
and that process of conversion therefore led to me gaining a background in specifically Catholic apologetics.
It's funny when you say you're self-taught in many ways, because there wasn't a field of apologetics in those days. I mean, there wasn't, like now people, if you say to someone, I want to be an apologist, people have an image. It's you, it's Jimmy, it's Pat Madrid, it's there. But there's no, I mean, I suppose maybe you looked back to, Frank Sheed maybe, or Chesterton.
No.
I don't know. No, none of that.
No. I mean, I knew who Frank Sheed and G.K. Chesterton were, but there was a big Protestant apologetics movement. And as a result, I had contemporary apologists in mind as models. What's this guy doing right? What could he do better on? Things like that. I didn't need to look to the past for inspiration. I was just now doing it in a new Catholic context.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, fascinating. And congratulations on 30 years, Jimmy. 30 years here at Catholic Answers.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
all
Here's
the
to another 30.
amen to another 30. Okay, all the questions are coming from
Mhm.
the internet. You didn't get any, like you said, the internet wasn't a thing when you started here, but now lots and lots of our interactions, including this right now, many people are joining us via the internet, and so we get questions from the internet, and we'll start with Joe's question. Joe asks this: if we are not guilty for the sins of our fathers, then why are we guilty of original sin? And he has a follow-up question. If Mary could be born without the stain of original sin, then why can't God afford us the same and let us all start off with a clean slate? And he says, thank you, Jimmy.
So we've got a problem in the term original sin because it comes across as misleading. When we use the word sin in English, at least in contemporary English, it means something that you have personally done wrong and that you are therefore personally responsible for. And that is not what original sin is. In fact, the Catechism goes out of its way to point out that original sin is not a personal fault. So, at least given how the word sin is used in contemporary English, we're using it in only an accommodated way when we talk about original sin. What original sin is, and that's the reason that that we have original sin, even though we're not personally responsible for the sins of our fathers. So if my father, let's say he recklessly drove and ran somebody over, which thanks be to God, my father never did. But
Yeah.
let's suppose he did. I'm not responsible for the fact he ran somebody over. He did that, not me. So I'm not responsible. And as a result, the way we have original sin is because of what it is. And notice I'm saying have original sin rather than guilty of original sin, because guilty implies personal guilt, and original sin does not make you personally guilty.
Right.
What original sin is essentially a kind of spiritual birth defect. It's a defect, meaning something that has gone wrong, but it's spiritual in nature. It's rather than purely physical in nature. And so it's inherited just like we could inherit other birth defects. For example, let's suppose I'm Homer Simpson and I go down to the nuclear plant and I'm playing irresponsibly with radioactive materials. Well,
Homer will.
If I damage my genes, then my children may be born bright yellow with bulging eyes and enormous overbites. My children might have birth defects because of what I've done. I've damaged my nature, and therefore, when I pass on my nature to my children, they may have a defect as a result. And that's essentially what happened with our entire species. Adam and Eve, our first parents, were in a state of original justice. So they had God's grace in their souls, and they had perfectly balanced natures. But then when they committed sin, they lost that original justice or original righteousness, and it damaged their natures. And therefore, when they reproduced, they passed on that damaged nature to us. But the reason we have original sin, the reason we're born with it, is because of the defective nature that has been passed on to us. We're missing original justice, and we've got disordered desires and so forth. So that's why we have it, even though we're not personally guilty for our ancestors' sins. In terms of the follow-up question, well, God could do for us exactly what he did for Mary. It's not a question of possibility. It is possible for God to render us all totally free of original sin and its consequences, and thus make us immaculate. And he will one day do that. We're not gonna be sinning and spotty and messed up in heaven.
Right.
So he will, by the time we enter heaven, make us immaculate, just like Mary is immaculate. But he did it for her early in order to make her a more fitting mother for his son. So he didn't have to do it for Mary, but he chose to do it because it made her a more fitting mother. And that's why she gets the benefit early and we don't, because she's his mom and we're not.
Very good. Thank you very, very much, Joe, for that question. Appreciate it. We got lots more questions coming from the internet. It's an internet open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. More of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Experience the incredible story of the woman who Time magazine named the most influential Catholic woman in the United States. Born Rita Rizzo, the future Mother Angelica grew up in a rough neighborhood in Canton, Ohio. Young Rita experienced abandonment, rejection, and heartache, but God touched her through a woman named Rhoda Wise. Encounter this amazing woman at the Mother Angelica Museum. Plan your visit today at motherangelicamuseum.com.
Unplanned, the true story of Abby Johnson.
I would be the youngest director in Planned Parenthood history.
She believed in a woman's right to choose.
I've had an abortion myself, so I don't have any problem with another woman making the same decision.
Until the day she saw something that changed everything.
Tiny, perfect little baby. And then it was just gone.
Now she's pulling back the curtain on the abortion industry. Unplanned.
Available at EWTNRC.com and the EWTN app.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest both hours today, and it's an internet open forum, which is always fun because we get lots of interesting questions. As a matter of fact, we get to be kind of selective in our questions, so you know you're getting good questions for Jimmy. So if you want to make a call, you have to call on another day. Today, it is all internet. I do want to invite you to come to our annual conference. It's coming up in September, the last full weekend of September each year. We do our annual apologetics conference. You can find out all about it at CatholicAnswersConference.com. If you use the promo code EARLY right now, you'll get $50 off your conference ticket at CatholicAnswersConference.com. Scott Hahn going to be one of the speakers. Our keynote speaker is Sister Regina Marie Gorman, and we're talking about God. It is an entire conference dedicated to thinking about how to defend, I suppose is one way to say it, the existence of God and the attributes of God in a world that has become increasingly distance from God. So very timely and helpful. We'd love to see you there. CatholicAnswersConference.com. All right, as I said, all the questions coming from the internet. This one comes from Dominic. You may have dealt with this before. Would aliens need baptism?
So, Cy Kellett, what's your guess? Have I dealt with this before?
I think personally, I've probably went with you 10 or 15 times when you've dealt with this.
Yeah.
And
But
that's just the last 6 years.
It's a fairly simple answer. So, under certain conditions, yeah, they would need baptism. Condition number one, they would need to be fallen or otherwise able to benefit. Well, I can divide it up this way. Number one, typically they would need to be fallen. Number two, typically they would have no other means of redemption. And number three, if they could be redeemed in this way. And if those three conditions, or a fourth, alternately, if they would benefit from baptism, even if they're not fallen, by being, say, a member of the mystical body of Christ with humans, then they would need baptism. So either they're sinners like us who can benefit from baptism, or they're not sinners but could still benefit from baptism. They would need baptism for those purposes. If, on the other hand, if those conditions don't apply, if they wouldn't benefit from it, and especially if they're not sinners or it wouldn't help them, then they would not need baptism.
Dominic, I thank you for the question. I'm sure that is not the last time Jimmy will answer that, because it brings together two things Jimmy's famous for: Catholic faith and aliens. So,
also, for more on aliens and their relationship to the Christian faith, check out episode 55 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World at mysterious.fm/55.
Thanks again, Dominic. All right, this one comes from a priest, Father Matthew Schneider, asks us this. We've had questions from him before. This one, clearly, he's some kind of deep thinking Thomist, because he wants to know, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
Yeah, now you partially defeat the purpose if you break it up like that and say it in slowly and in chunks. You're supposed to do it quick. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
I know my limits, Jimmy. I know my limits.
Okay, so when I post calls for questions, a lot of people ask questions that they're really wanting me to answer, and then some people occasionally put in smart aleck questions, which I then have to weed out. Effectively, when you put in a smart aleck question, you're wasting my time, because I just have to undo your work and to get the real question list that we need for the show. So I prefer it if people don't ask smart aleck questions. So I'm sure Father Matthew would never ask a smart aleck question and would never want to waste my time. So therefore, I will give him a straight answer. I assume he wants it. He asked it. I treat everybody's questions seriously, except when I don't. And tautologically, there is a very good answer to this. It is a tautological answer, but the answer is as much wood as a woodchuck could chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood.
That was pretty good, Jimmy. That was pretty good. You did that fast. All right, Father. I hope that helps you. Is a woodchuck like that little animal like a squirrel? Is that?
It's bigger than a squirrel, but it is a mammal, and it has big teeth.
Thanks, Father Matthew. This one comes from Marita. What was God's plan if Adam and Eve... I always like that one. What was God's plan if Adam and Eve did not sin? What does original justice really mean? When we say Adam and Eve were not supposed to die, what death are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about primarily physical death, because that's what's envisioned overtly in Genesis is physical death. Adam and Eve commit the sin, and therefore they're denied access to the tree of life, and without access to the tree of life, they end up dying. And that's what they were warned would happen. You also, if you conceptualize sin as a form of spiritual death, well, then they also experienced that. But God had mercy on them, and so they seem to have returned from that state of spiritual death. In terms of what original justice meant for Adam and Eve, well, if they had, it means that they had sanctifying grace, so they had God's grace in their soul. They were in a state of spiritual union with God. They also presumably did not have disordered desires prior to the fall. And there is various theological speculation that they may have had what we would call superpowers. Now, this is not church teaching, but you will have, people like Thomas Aquinas saying that their bodies, for example, would have had the quality of agility, which would be a preternatural gift that would basically amount to teleportation. So if Adam wanted to be on the moon, just in a flash, he would be on the moon. Now, I'm skeptical of that. I don't know that these arguments are particularly well grounded in the superpower area. However, there have been Catholic parapsychologists who have speculated that what psychic powers are the remnants of abilities that God put into human nature that we had better control of before the fall. So whereas for Adam and Eve, they may have had precognition or telepathy or clairvoyance or something or psychokinesis in a way they could control and use in a useful way, but following the fall, such abilities no longer work reliably for us. And that was the view, for example, of the 20th century parapsychologist Father Alois Weisinger and also Father Herbert Thurston, who were, as I said, a couple of Catholic parapsychologists. They both lived in the 20th century. So that's a possibility. Now, one of the in terms of what would have happened, if they had not sinned? Well, they would have continued in that state of original justice. And according to many theologians, they eventually would have been confirmed in that state. So the idea is God gave them a period of probation where they could make a choice either way. And if they consistently had chosen good during their period of probation, they eventually would have become confirmed in good, just like we'll be confirmed in good in heaven. And so there is the proposal that that would have happened to them as well. Also, they would have retained access to the tree of life, and therefore they would have been able to eat from the tree of life, presumably on an ongoing basis, and avoid physical death.
So thank you very, very much, Marita, for that question. Appreciate it. It's Internet Open Forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and this one comes from Steve. Suppose someone was alone in the woods and knew he was transforming into a zombie or a cordyceps zombie, which I assume Jimmy will explain to me. And if his zombified self made it back to civilization, it could be a disaster for the species. Could it be morally licit for him to end his own life to prevent this?
Okay, so good news. In real life, cordyceps are not harmful to humans. Cordyceps are a kind of fungus. In fact, in humans, they're used in traditional Chinese medicine for perceived health benefits. Whether they really have health benefits, I don't know. I've never used cordyceps. I've never done any testing or research about them. But this fungus is not really gonna hurt a human. However, it does eat insects from the inside out. So it is harmful to various insects. And hypothetically, a kind of cordyceps that, would zombify a human could evolve. But good news is we're not there yet. So you don't got to worry too much about cordyceps. But setting that aside, so let's suppose you become infected with a zombie pathogen, whether it's cordyceps or something else, and you're in the woods and you know that if you make it back to civilization, it'll be a disaster for the species. Would it be morally licit to kill yourself in order to stop the threat? Well, killing yourself would be suicide, and suicide is always wrong. So you couldn't kill yourself, but you could do something else. You could kill the cordyceps. You could kill the zombie pathogen.
Oh.
You could stop the zombie pathogen from using your body to move toward human civilization. And that might mean you're going to die as a result, but in this case, you're not killing yourself. You're killing or immobilizing the pathogen. And if you die as a result, okay, it's not suicide. You're not killing yourself. You're going to die as a result. But the target of what you're killing is the pathogen, not you. And therefore, you're not guilty of suicide. You're accepting your death as a foreseen consequence of another action that has a legitimate purpose. It's like if you're in a foxhole in World War I, and someone throws a hand grenade into your foxhole, and it's going to kill everybody in the foxhole unless you jump on it and cover it with your body, you can jump on it. Now, that's almost certainly going to kill you, but it will save the lives of everybody else. And it's not suicide because your goal is not to kill yourself. Your goal is to stop that grenade from going off. And killing everybody. You just die as a result. And in the same way, if you're stopping the cordyceps and it happens to kill you as a side effect, your goal is not to kill yourself. Your goal is to stop that cordyceps. And the goal of stopping the grenade from killing everybody, your goal is to stop the cordyceps from killing everybody or zombifying everybody. And so it would be legitimate to undertake lethal action in regard to the cordyceps, even if the lethal effect will also kill you. So, news you can use.
Well, I hope you won't be using it, Stephen. That would be very bad news for all the rest of us. But a fascinating moral calculation, because it's so easy to see when you see the falling on the grenade thing. Well, that's heroic. But you can if you're carrying a disease that I don't know what I guess turning everyone into a zombie is pretty much the end of the human race, you can kill the disease.
It's definitely a bump.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, there's probably. You know what? That might be one of those little evolutionary bumps where now the people who survive will be immune to this thing.
That could be.
And then we go on stronger as a species. In any case, Steve, don't bring the cordyceps near me. I don't want. So, is there some kind of? There's a TV show or something about these cordyceps ones? I think I read about this. Do you know?
It's been a while. I'm not familiar with the details, but like there's a TV show or game where cordyceps is the pathogen.
Oh, gotcha. All right, Stephen, thank you very much. Lots more great questions coming up because it's an internet open forum. All the questions for Jimmy Akin in this open forum today coming from the internet. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it. We'll be right back with more of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live. This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns its attention to the question of God in an age of unbelief. Join us September 21st through 24th in San Diego for I Believe in God, featuring very special guest Scott Hahn and an all-star lineup of speakers. Spend 4 fun days with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. Seats are still available, but going fast. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 and register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, Jimmy Akin, our guest for this internet open forum. All the questions coming from the internet. Jimmy, of course, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which you can find at mysterious.fm. And I like saying that because I don't usually remember websites, and this one I've got memorized, mysterious.fm. Check it out. It's one of the very, very popular corners of the internet these days. Very popular documentary podcasts and all kinds of cool mysteries for you to explore over there. Our next question from the internet. Oh, go ahead.
So do you want to know what's coming out tomorrow?
I was anxious about whether I should ask. I didn't know whether I thought I.
You can always ask. If I know the date a pre-record is airing, I can tell you what's happening. Yeah.
So tomorrow, June 2nd. Tomorrow from today is June 2nd. What would it be, Jimmy?
Well, so the previous Friday, last week, we told you a very interesting story about, it's called The 21st Century Poltergeist. And it's about a little boy who began displaying poltergeist effects on all of the electronic devices that we have around us in the 20th century. So instead of just moving objects, he appeared, according to the reports, he was interfering with the electrical function of all kinds of different devices. So you can check out last week's episode, which is already out, and hear about the 21st century poltergeist. In terms of what's coming out tomorrow, it's a Patrons Question Show, and we're going to be answering questions like whether you can be possessed by an angel, We're going to talk about the hollow moon theory, the Genesis flood and the Younger Dryas flooding, whether there are two Marys in the raising of Lazarus account, how we got the chapters and verses of the Bible, the Aramaic of the Lord's Prayer, the Philadelphia experiment, Ouija boards, King Arthur, the Nation of Islam, and more.
Boy, that is a cornucopia of good stuff tomorrow. The poltergeist kid is scary. He can't send you to the cornfield, can he?
He cannot.
Okay, all right.
Even if you're a bad man, he can't do that.
That makes me nervous.
Even if you're a very bad man, he can't do that.
That kid was too good an actor. That was
Billy Mooney.
Oh yeah, did he go on to do Lost in Space?
That's correct.
Yeah,
and Babylon 5.
Yeah, well,
and Barnes and Barnes.
That still bothers me. Do you know what we're talking about, Darren? Do you have any idea what we're talking about? That's the old Twilight Zone. One of the scariest episodes. A kid who could send you into the cornfield with his mind. Well, watch it.
It's a Good Life.
Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
Oh. Ryan asks this: why is it that the Knox and Douay-Rheims Bible Old Testaments only feature 3rd and 4th Kings, but not other translation of the Old Testament in other Catholic Bibles?
Okay, so if you look in the Knox or the Douay-Rheims Old Testament, you'll see that it has these 4 books called 1st Kings, 2nd Kings, 3rd Kings, and 4th Kings. And if you look in most Bibles, you're only going to see that they have 1st and 2nd Kings. But then you're going to see they got a couple extra books, 1st and 2nd Samuel. And if you look back in your Knox or your Douay version, there's no 1st and 2nd Samuel. So why do Knox and Douay have 3rd and 4th Kings, but not 1st and 2nd Samuel? And the answer is because they all have all the same books. They're just going by different names. Mm-hmm. So in most Bibles, you will see the sequence 1st Samuel, 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings, 2nd Kings. And the reason for that is because the books of Samuel deal with an early period and the beginning of Israel's monarchy. And then once you get into the Kings, you're dealing with multiple kings. I mean, there actually is more than one king in 1st and 2nd Samuel, but you get a whole slew of kings in 1st and 2nd Kings. So that's why the first 2 books are called Samuel and the second 2 books are called Kings. In the first 2 books, you get a bunch about the prophet Samuel before the monarchy begins. And then in 1st and 2nd Kings, you get a whole bunch of different kings. Now, but you do got kings in 1st and 2nd Samuel. You've got Saul, you've got Saul's son, Ishbosheth, you've got David. And so there's some kings in there too. And as a result, when the Septuagint Greek Old Testament was being translated, they decided to call 1st and 2nd Samuel 1st and 2nd Kings. And that then made what we call 1st and 2nd Kings 3rd and 4th Kings. Mm-hmm. So the sequence 1st Samuel, 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings, 2nd Kings is the same books under different names in the sequence 1st Kings, 2nd Kings, 3rd Kings, 4th Kings. And then at the end of that sequence, you'll also have 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which in some of these older Bibles will be called 1st and 2nd Paralipomenon, but it's the same books. So they all have the same books. It's just that they sometimes go by different names. And after the Septuagint introduced the 1st to 4th Kings language, that got picked up by the Vulgate, and then the Douay is a translation of the Vulgate, and the Knox is another, kind of retro translation, so it uses that same terminology as well.
Got it. Ryan, I hope that's helpful to you. I won't ask Jimmy it now, but I have a similar question about there used to be a movie called Star Wars, but now that movie doesn't exist anymore. There's a movie called Star Wars: A New Hope.
Episode 4, A New Hope.
Oh, Episode 4, A New Hope, yeah. But there used to be a movie called Star Wars, but it just doesn't exist. Look it up. It doesn't exist anymore. Patrick wants to know this. When someone is canonized a saint, who decides what attributes will be associated with the images of the saint? St. Peter has his keys. St. Lucy has her eyes. If there is ever a St. Jimmy, how will your attributes be identified?
Okay, so as far as I know, there is not a central registry that determines this. If there were, it would, at least for most saints, it would be the dicastery for the causes of saints in Rome. But as far as I know, they don't do this. They don't issue lists of, now that we have this new saint, here's what their attributes are going to be for visual depiction. I should explain what that is. I mean, Patrick does explain it, but it's traditional to depict saints with certain visual things. So even if you don't have a label telling you the name of the saint, you can still tell who the saint is. So Jesus gave St. Peter the keys of the kingdom, so it's customary to depict Peter with keys. And so if you see a picture of a saint and he's got keys, he's probably St. Peter. But as far as I know, there is not an official body that determines this. As to the extent of my awareness, this is a folk process that is determined by artists and their patrons when they are making Christian art. And so whether it's Western art or icon writing, icon painting, it's really the artistic community that ends up deciding how to depict a particular saint in a distinctive way so you can recognize him visually. And so to my knowledge, that's how it's done. It's really a kind of a collective decision that gets made by artists. In terms of if there were a St. Jimmy, what would my visual attributes be? Well, it'd be up to the artists, but I would presume a long red beard would be one of them. Also a cowboy hat and possibly a pipe. So there's some suggestions for future artists if there ever were to be a St. Jimmy.
And possibly an alien looking over your shoulder.
Sure, why not?
Because one of the
I could be baptizing the alien.
Oh, that's right. Jimmy, famous for answering the question, will we baptize aliens? You never know what's going to last. That might be the thing that'll last. Thank you very much for your question. Appreciate that. That was Ryan. Was that Ryan? Yeah, no, that was Patrick. I apologize, Patrick. I don't know if I gave your name at the beginning of that one. It's time to take a break. As you can tell by my floundering around, we'll take that break. We'll be right back with more open forum, but it's an internet open forum for Jimmy Akin right after this.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
He is only one of 4 popes honored as the Great.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Leo I was pope at a time when Roman civilization was being overrun by barbarian armies. He stood as a light in the darkness and even saved the city of Rome from destruction by Attila and the Huns. Leo died in 461.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guests. We're doing an internet open forum. We got lots and lots of questions from the internet. You can send them to us. If you're like, oh, I want to get in on that for next time, just shoot us an email over at radio@catholic.com. Radio@catholic.com. Either Edgar or I will find it there. One of us will find it, and we'll get it to Jimmy. All right, so this one comes from, I was going to do Patrick again. This one comes from Jordana. Is there anything in tradition as to why Pilate only offers to release either Jesus or Barabbas and not the 2 thieves crucified next to Jesus? Could they have been Gentiles?
Well, I'm not aware of anything in tradition. I mean, certainly there's nothing in an authoritative church tradition. This is not the kind of matter that really would be dealt with by that, because that deals with the substance of the faith, and it's not a matter of the faith what Pilate's motivations were. But in terms of lower T tradition, there may have been some early authors who speculated on this, none of them early enough that they would be historically informed by, someone in Pilate's circle as to what his motives were. And so really it would be conjecture on their part. And we can do conjecture today. In terms of why Jesus and Barabbas, well, because they were both notable prisoners. And the purpose behind Pilate releasing a prisoner is to earn favor with the local population. And so that's that's why you release political prisoners. And usually the political prisoners who get released frequently, they are the big famous ones. And so because you get more favor with the populace that way, if you give them someone who is famous and they all know about, then they're going to look at you more favorably than if you give them some nobody that nobody has ever heard of. And so if you're going to do this kind of political prisoner release, you're going to tend to release notorious people and people who are well known. And so Jesus was well known in the days leading up to his certainly in the days leading up to the crucifixion. Also, Barabbas was well known. We're even told in the Gospels that he was well known. Presumably, the other two criminals that were not released were not as well known as Barabbas. And in fact, Barabbas may have been their boss. This is where we get into some conjecture. We're told that Barabbas had been arrested in an uprising in the city. And so he was like a political rabble leader that had been, he'd staged a riot of some kind. And we're also told that the other two criminals are lesthai, which lestheis in Greek. It's sometimes translated robber, but it also can be translated revolutionary, because back then, if you wanted to do a revolution, you usually had to rob people. And so robbers and revolutionaries were overlapping job descriptions. And so these other two, lesthai, were probably in the same rebellion that Barabbas was in. Barabbas may have been a ringleader in the rebellion, and the other two were just collaborators in the rebellion. And so in discerning what one prisoner am I going to release, he's going to go for one of the big dogs. He's going to go for Jesus or Barabbas because they're the famous ones. They will earn him more public favor if he releases them. He's not going to release the little foot soldier followers in the rebellion.
Very, very interesting. Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate that question, Jordana. Let's go to Eileen's question. Eileen asks, when detectives do undercover work, does that constitute lying, and could it be considered consequentialism?
It's going to depend on your definition of lying. Okay. If you define lying as the utterance with intent to deceive of any untruth, then yes, not only detectives, but also spies and other people like that lie constantly as part of their jobs. They use ruses, they use deception, and they say things with intent to deceive that are not true. They also do things with intent to deceive. And that's also in the Catechism is lumped under the definition of lying as well. So it doesn't have to just be words. And it could or could not be considered consequentialism depending on your understanding of consequentialism. Now, when we do moral calculations, one of the things we need to take into account is the consequences. So just because consequences get appealed to though, does not make it consequentialism, because every sane theory of moral calculation includes consequences. You know, if I'm facing the question, do I drive to the supermarket? Well, okay, what are the odds of me hitting and killing somebody? Are they low enough? And the answer is almost always yes, but are they low enough that that I can reasonably go get what I want at the store and be morally blameless? On the other hand, if I'm got a cold and I'm taking cold medicine and it's making me woozy, well, the risk of hitting somebody on the way to the store might be high enough that I should let someone else go to the store or use DoorDash or something like that, rather than endanger someone because I'm doped up on cold medicine and it's making me woozy. So every sane theory of morals is going to include a look at the consequences. What distinguishes that from consequentialism is consequentialism says only the consequences are important, nothing else. And you aren't, just because you're telling untruths to someone with intent to deceive, you aren't saying the consequences of this are the only things that are important. I can imagine and have talked about theories of lying where you can include a look at the consequences, but it doesn't make it the consequences are the only important thing. For example, one of the ways that has occurred to me to conceptualize what lying does is it essentially damages another person's belief system by feeding false information into their belief system. And so it's a kind of damage. If you want to use a fancy philosophical term for it, it's a form of doxastic damage, meaning damage to beliefs. And so we can then ask the question, well, is it ever illicit to do damage to someone? Can you ever punch anybody? And the answer is yes. For example, in self-defense or proxy self-defense, where you're saving somebody else's life, you can sock somebody. You can do physical damage to them. It's not your first resort, but it can be done if it's the only or best way to solve a situation. But does that mean any use of physical force is justified? Could I kill innocent people if it had good consequences? Well, no, you can't, because they're innocent people. So if you think in terms of use of physical violence, well, we got to consider the consequences of using it. And it's legitimate in some cases, like self-defense or defending someone else, but not all use of it is justified. And in the same way, I could see someone saying, okay, well, if lying is essentially damaging someone's belief system, then there could be situations where the damage is warranted. And I'll give an example in a moment, but that doesn't mean that it's warranted in all situations. For example, one thing I don't think you can deceive someone about is, are you a Christian? If you're called upon to acknowledge your Christian faith, you can't lie about that. You can't say, no, I'm not a Christian. Similarly, if someone asks, is Jesus the Son of God? You can't, it's intrinsically wrong to tell them he's not the Son of God. And so you can't lie about that. But I can see situations where damaging a person's belief system could be legitimate. And of course, one of the classic examples is the Nazis come to your door and want to know if you have Jews in your attic. Well, if I'm honest and I tell them, yes, I have Jews in my attic, if I don't try to deceive them, then it's going to result in the deaths of the Jews. It's going to result in my death probably, or I've got to kill these officers and it's going to result in their death. On the other hand, if I just say, nah, I don't got any Jews in my attic. Look at my big Nazi flag. I'm with you guys, okay? then I've damaged their belief system by making them think I'm a Nazi when I'm not. But I've saved the Jewish lives, I've saved my life, and I've saved their lives. And so I think that that's a situation where on this theory of lying is potentially justified. Not everybody agrees with that. Some people have a different theory of lying. They say it can never be justified under any circumstances, in which case you either have to say what detectives and spies do is always wrong, or you got to come up with some kind of exception for why what they're doing is not really lying. And I've talked to some people of this persuasion and said, okay, so can they do this? And they'll say, can they use tactical deception? They'll say, oh, yes. Well, how is that not lying that's not permitted by your view? And they'll just say, well, it's just not. And I have been unsatisfied with that answer. It's personally, I'm inclined towards the damage theory of lying, where where lying is a form of intellectual violence, and violence can be used in some but not all circumstances. So that's how I would tend to answer that.
Thank you so much for that question, Eileen. So the commandment, thou shalt not give false witness, that refers to a very specific kind of lying then?
Well, it properly speaking, it refers to lying in court. And so you shall not give false testimony in court. It represents a principle that's broader than that. We shouldn't be ordinarily lying to each other in society either, because that's going to cause problems. You need society to basically run on trust, and in order for it to run on trust, you need truthfulness. So you have a general need for truth-telling in broader society that goes beyond merely what the commandment would formally require, which is truth-telling in court.
Right, but you would if you lied about someone in court, you're definitely breaking that. That would be, in other words,
yes,
the absolute, the kind of literal baseline would be you cannot go into court and which, I mean, that seems very, very basic. That's a terrible injustice to commit against someone.
You would be a false witness against your neighbor, and therefore you would be breaking the commandment in the most literal sense.
I'm not giving out the phone number today because it's an internet open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy celebrating 30 years today at Catholic. Today is the 30th anniversary of Jimmy's Report to Work Day here at Catholic Answers. It's an extraordinary 30 years, 25 of it here, 25 and a half now on the air here at Catholic Answers Live. An extraordinary record, and we're going to continue when we come back with more internet open forum questions. These, as Jimmy said before, there was no internet when he started here, but now a great deal of our work is done via the internet. And one of the ways you can use that internet is, if you'd like, we'd love you to come to Rome with us coming up in November of this year. And on November 9th, the flannel panel that you hear sometimes here on Catholic Answers Live is heading to Rome, and you can join us on that pilgrimage just by going to CatholicAnswersPilgrimage.com. It's going to be a true pilgrimage. We will visit the Vatican. We will do our very best. As of right now, we fully intend to go to do the Scavi tour underneath, where you can see the bones of St. Peter, and you can pray there by the bones of St. Peter. You can see all the little crypts that are underneath what is now the St. Peter's Basilica, the great basilica of the Catholic Church. But plus, we'll be visiting all kinds of things that you might not otherwise visit, sites that might not come up on a more secular tour of Rome. We'll be
visiting. You should go to the Tarpeian Rock.
Oh, we should go to the Tarpeian Rock, but from the bottom up, looking from the bottom up, not the top down. That's where they used to throw you off if they got really mad at you.
I know. I love in the 12 tables of Roman law, you'll occasionally have this death sentence. If someone does X, let him be hurled from the Tarpeian Rock.
Just throw you off the rock. That's how they did it in those days. So if you want to join us on the pilgrimage, go to CatholicAnswersPilgrimage.com, CatholicAnswersPilgrimage.com. There are still spots available, but we're only taking 50 with us. That's so that we can all stay on the same bus together. And we'll be staying right down by the Forum at the Forum Hotel right downtown in Rome. Coming back, once again, go to CatholicAnswersPilgrimage.com if you want to join us. Coming back with a whole hour more of Open Forum, Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin continues right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin, our guest for the second hour, and we go back to the internet for all of our questions. It's an internet open forum, so if I give out the number, that will be a mistake on my part because we're not giving out the number today. We're just taking all of our questions. They've already been, I shouldn't say we're taking them from the internet. They have been taken already from the internet. So if you'd like to participate in an internet open forum in the future, maybe you are connected to Jimmy in some way and the social media accounts and all that, you can do that, or you can just send it to us, radio@catholic.com, radio@catholic.com. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, senior by virtue of production and success and all of that, but also by virtue of time here. And this is the 30th anniversary of Jimmy's first day here at Catholic Answers. Jimmy, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not only the senior apologist, I'm the senior employee.
You are the senior employee. That is so wild. And this place has had some long-term employees too. It's not like people come here and just flit back out again. But you're the champ now. You are the champ, my friend, and we'll keep on fighting till the end.
Well, we are the champions.
Thank you for giving us, including us all in that. Internet open forum. A whole bunch of questions for Jimmy, and this one comes from John. What's a good response to someone who insists that believers don't need a hierarchy?
Well, I'd say a few things. One is he doesn't understand human nature. Humans spontaneously form hierarchies. It is a human universal. Hierarchies appear in every culture, everywhere in the world, in all of human history. Virtually all organizations, large and small, have hierarchies, whether it's a little club that's purely voluntary or a major nation. It's got it almost always has a hierarchy. And usually it's a formal hierarchy where you have like elected officers. But even if you don't have that, you have an informal hierarchy where certain people just step forward as leaders and get things done. And so all large organizations have to have hierarchies. If you have hundreds or thousands of people, much less millions or billions, you need a hierarchy to organize a group that's so large. And if the group is going to endure through time, if it's going to be long lasting, it's also going to need a hierarchy that can provide effective leadership. Therefore, hierarchies are part of human nature. Now, Cy Kellett, is the church meant to be an organization?
It is indeed, yes. It's an organization.
Is it meant to be large by Jesus?
It's supposed to be universal. I believe it's in the title.
Okay, and is it meant to be enduring?
Yes, it is indeed meant to be enduring till the very end.
Right, because he said the gates of hell will not prevail against it, and he's going to be coming back at the end of time, and so it's not going to pass out of existence. So the church is meant to be a big, enduring organization. That means it needs a hierarchy. And we see that hierarchy reflected in the New Testament itself, where, for one example, the author of Hebrews tells his readers, who were first century Christians, to obey those who are over them in the Lord. So we see a hierarchy with obedience in the first century church. And therefore, we know both by first principles of human nature and what the church is, and also by explicit testimony of the New Testament that there's supposed to be a hierarchy in the church, and therefore believers need a hierarchy.
And thank you very much for that question, John. We do appreciate it. It's an internet open forum. I'm going to say Rio. I don't know how to pronounce the name, so I'm going to say Rio. When Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, actually wrote JTB, but I'm guessing that means John the Baptist. Did John hear God say?
Who else was Jesus baptized by?
I know. I guess so. I guess I could. I used context clues on that one, Jimmy. To know. When Jesus was baptized by JTB, did John hear God say that Jesus was his son? If so, why did John ask Jesus if he was the Messiah in Luke 7?
So, according to the Gospels, John did realize that when he baptized Jesus, he did have a visionary experience in which Jesus was declared to be God's son, and that helped him identify Jesus as the coming one, as the Messiah. So, at the time of the baptism, John knew that Jesus was the Messiah. But then, according to the Synoptic Gospels, he later came to have some doubts. And he sent some of his followers with a message to Jesus saying, "Are you the one we're looking for or not?" And the presumed reason for that is, well, Jesus wasn't acting like the kind of Messiah that John expected. Many people in the first century expected a political Messiah who would start a revolution and kick out the Romans and restore a political monarchy to Israel. That was widely perceived, and also destroy sinners. That was widely perceived to be what the Messiah was going to do. For example, there's a work of literature that was written around 100 BC. It's called the Psalms of Solomon. And they're not actually by Solomon. They're actually by Pharisees. They represent a piece of Pharisaic literature. So Pharisees wrote these. And one of them is devoted to the Messiah. And yeah, he's going to come. He's going to smash the Romans. He's going to restore the kingship. He's going to destroy sinners and things like that. So this was a very common understanding of the Messiah, and presumably it influenced what John thought Jesus was going to do. But then he saw Jesus not doing that, and it led to doubt. And so he sent the message and said, "Is it you or not?" And Jesus's reply is very interesting. And tell John what you see and hear. The lame walk, the dead are raised, and he names a bunch of different things, several, like 5 or 6 different things that he's been doing. And the poor have good news preached to them. And I was attending an exhibit of the Dead Sea Scrolls a few years ago here in the United States. It was touring the United States. And they had, at the time, these little electronic devices. They looked like paddles, but you could punch a number into the paddle and hold it up to your ear, and it would play a recording for you to describe an exhibit. And so I was looking at an exhibit of a document. It was from one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was very small, but I typed in the number, I put it up to my ear, and it lists exactly the things that Jesus named for John the Baptist as proof that he was the Messiah. The lame walk, the dead are raised, the poor have good news preached to them. It was the same list with almost no variation. And what I was listening to in the Dead Sea Scrolls was a recording of a document called the Messianic Apocalypse. And what the Messianic Apocalypse does is it describes things that the Messiah is going to do. And instead of portraying the Messiah the way many people thought, is the Messiah essentially as a miracle worker, which is what, of course, Jesus was. That was one of the things he was doing as part of his ministry, was all these miracles and preaching the good news to the poor. So it looks like we have a second understanding of the Messiah that's out there that in the first century that was held, for example, by the Dead Sea Scrolls community. And when John sends his query to Jesus and says, "Are you the one or not?" he's thinking, "Are you the political Messiah?" And of course, Jesus is not. But what he does is he points John to the other understanding of the Messiah as a miracle worker and says, "Tell him what you see and hear. I'm doing all these things." And thus, I'm that kind of Messiah. I'm not the political kind. I'm this other kind.
Oh, what a great question. Thank you so much for that question. That brings us right to the first break. We'll take that break and be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
The power of prayer simply means that words have an effect. For example, when a couple says, "I do," it literally changes two people to becoming one in marriage. When you say, "I love you," it changes us and it gives us value. The power of prayer is in the words and in the sentiment, but it's also in the fact that God, who is omnipotent, all-powerful, answers our prayers.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thanks so much for being here with us. Jimmy Akin is with us this hour for an open forum. It's an internet open forum. All of the questions have already been gathered. And this one comes from Nicholas. Nicholas says, soul sleep. I've read everything on Catholic Answers, including your own article, Jimmy Akin. Recent rebuttal to Luke 15 was this refers to angels but not saints, as they are dead until raised. Or in the Transfiguration, these were mere visions.
Okay, so I should mention what soul sleep is. It's a view that is kind of it's a minority view in various Christian circles. It's particularly common in Seventh-day Adventism, but it is found in some other groups of Protestants as well. And the basic idea, there are different variants on it, but the basic idea is that you are not conscious between death and resurrection. Sometimes this is called Christian mortalism, and the idea is that you die, meaning basically cease to exist, and then God reconstitutes you, kind of like a transporter, I guess, on the last day. And another version says, well, no, you do continue to exist, but you're unconscious, and that's often called soul sleep. But both with soul sleep and Christian mortalism, you have the idea of there's no conscious experience in the afterlife until you get to the resurrection. And, we have various resources about this on Catholic.com. I've written about it. I guess, since you tell me you've read my article on it, after 30 years, I don't remember all the articles I've written. But Nicholas talks here about a couple of passages. He says a recent rebuttal that he encountered to Luke 15 was that this referred to angels, but not saints, as they are dead until raised. So it sounds like he was encountering a Christian mortalist there. I'm not really sure off the top of my head what passage he's referring to, because Luke 15 has three parables in it. It's got the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son, also known as the parable of the prodigal son. And there aren't angels in any of those parables, really. Or I suppose at the end of the parable of the lost sheep, Jesus has just said that there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. And that could be interpreted as being the joy of angels. I wouldn't tend to use this passage as an argument against soul sleep, because it is plausibly understood as the joy in heaven is either by angels or God. I mean, sometimes the divine passive is used as a way of communicating something is true of God, like when Jesus says, all power in heaven and earth has been given to me. That's a divine passive. He means God has given me all power on heaven and on earth. And so when you hear that there's more joy in heaven, that could be that over these sinners who repent, that could be a reference to God's joy. Or at a minimum, it could be a reference to the angel's joy. But I don't see any proof that humans are involved in this passage, and therefore I wouldn't use this passage against soul sleep. Maybe some other people do, but I wouldn't, because I don't think it's a good one. A passage that I would cite in against soul sleep occurs in the next chapter, in Luke 16, which has the account of Lazarus and the rich man. In this parable, or in this account, both Lazarus and the rich man and Abraham are depicted as being conscious in the afterlife. And therefore, we have to ask ourselves, what value does this parable have in informing us about the afterlife? Well, you could say it's just a parable and we shouldn't assign any value to it. But I think there are two problems with that view. The first one is it's not actually clear that it's just a parable. This is distinct from Jesus's other parables in a number of ways. One of them is Lazarus has a name, and that is not at all what we see in Jesus's other parables. It's always there was a king, or there was a man, or there was a father who had two sons. Nobody's got names. And here, somebody has a name for the first and only time in a parable. And this Lazarus that we read about in the account, he dies, and then after death, there's a proposal that he go back and show himself to the living. Psychelet.
That sounds awfully familiar.
Did Jesus know anyone named Lazarus who died and then came back and showed himself to the living?
Darren's helping me out. He's like, yes, say yes, say yes. Yes, he did, the brother of Mary and Martha.
Right, and that account is mentioned in John chapter 11, and also Mary and Martha are mentioned in Luke. So we know that Luke was aware of the Bethany family. So this actually may not be as much of a parable as you might think it is. It may be more. That's why I called it an account. Also, there's a second reason. Even if you say this is just a parable, maybe it's loosely inspired by the story of Lazarus, but it doesn't say what really happened to him. Okay, fine. But notice that Jesus's parables are informed by real life. I mean, when he says there was this guy and he went out and sowed seed, well, guess what? Farmers are real. Or there was a guy and he had a vineyard. Well, guess what? Vintners are real. Or there was a guy and he had two sons. Well, guess what? Fathers are real. You go through his parables, they're all based on real life experiences. And so knowing that, if he then depicts three people in this parable as conscious in the afterlife, we would assume this parable is informed by real life, just like all the other ones are. And so just like fathers and kings and vintners and farmers exist, so do conscious afterlives. Then there are other passages. Now, Nicholas also mentions the transfiguration. And what he, I assume, has in mind there is the fact Moses and Elijah appear. And the claim being made to him is it's just a vision of Moses and Elijah. They're not really there. Okay, you can assert that, but you don't have any proof of that. What the text says is that Moses and Elijah appeared and talked with Jesus. It does not say that just images of them appeared. It says they appeared. And so you can reply and say, it says they appeared. That's what I'm going with. If you want to deny that, you can deny that, but the text is not on your side. There also are passages in the book of Revelation where we have people who have been killed in the Great Tribulation coming up to heaven. They're clearly conscious in the afterlife. We also in the Old Testament have 1 Samuel 28, where the medium of Endor conjures up the spirit of Samuel. And he is, at least while she's talking to him, he's conscious in the afterlife. And it says it's Samuel. It doesn't say it's a demon pretending to be Samuel. It doesn't say it's a trick. The inspired author of 1 Samuel says it was Samuel. So I think we actually have quite a good bit of evidence for conscious afterlife in both the Old and the New Testament. Not even to mention In, for example, Second Maccabees, you have the deceased high priest Onias and the deceased prophet Jeremiah appearing to Judah Maccabee, and they're conscious in the afterlife. So I know that's not in the Seventh-day Adventist canon, but it is part of pre-Christian Jewish literature. They were envisioning a conscious afterlife.
Nicholas, thank you so much for that question. Appreciate it. I'm going to go to Kelly now, who asks this. Our bishop interprets Penitemini in such a way that we are required to abstain from gravies and soups made from meat in the Fridays of Lent. How many other dioceses follow this interpretation?
Well, I don't have statistics on that. I have never heard of an American diocese taking that interpretation. I would, there may be some, but I'm not aware of statements that have been made, and I certainly haven't taken a tally of them. What is being referred to here is a document that was released by Paul VI in the 1960s following Vatican II. The name Penitemini means y'all will do penance. Mm-hmm. And so it regulates the penitential disciplines, including the laws of fast and abstinence. And if you study the legislative history of this question, there was at one time a prohibition on soups and sauces, including gravies, made with meat. But then that prohibition gets dropped. And one of the standard principles of law is if they change the law, the change is significant. And so if you have a restriction and then subsequent laws repeat everything but that one exemption or that one condition, then that you should regard it as no longer binding. And so by my read and the read of the canon lawyers I'm familiar with, the Penitemini, we are no longer required to abstain from gravies or soups or sauces that are made with meat. Now, it's still a good thing to do. You can still abstain from them. Personally, I do, but I don't think it's required by the law, which creates an interesting situation. What would you be bound by if you're in a diocese where your bishop has said, I think Penitemini prohibits consuming these foods? Well, I would say, at least based on my study of the law, which has been considerable in this area on this exact question, I would say I think the bishop is mistaken. And when a bishop misreads the law applies. And so if the law does not require you to abstain from these foods, then even if your bishop thinks it does, if he's mistaken, the law really doesn't. And so you would not be legally required to abstain from these foods.
Thank you.
Unless your bishop uses his legislative authority to not just give his interpretation of the law, but to impose a restriction in his diocese, because bishops can use their legislative authority to create particular law for their own diocese, and they can regulate the exercise of fast and abstinence in their diocese. And therefore, if the bishop says, I think Penitemini requires us to abstain from these, he's not using his authority. He's expressing his opinion. And I would say I think that opinion is mistaken. But if he says, as bishop, I'm using my authority to create a regulation for my diocese, and these foods are not allowed in my diocese, then that would bind the faithful of his diocese, and you would be obliged to follow it.
So check the bishop's statements carefully there. That was from Kelly, thank you very, very much. Appreciate the question. It's an internet open forum today. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy is the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and as he told us last hour, tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, it is
patrons' questions.
I was trying to think of the word patrons. I got stuck on the word patrons. Patrons' questions, and what do you got?
Oh, things like can you be possessed by an angel, and Ouija boards, and Noah's flood and the Younger Dryas melt off, and all kinds of stuff.
Those are fun ones. You get a whole variety. Last week, it's the kid who could affect electronic devices. He was modern. What do you call him? 21st century.
The 21st century poltergeist.
Check it out, because Jimmy has already assured me the kid cannot put you into the cornfield. So we are going to take a very quick break. If you want to check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, you go to mysterious.fm. Mysterious.fm. Lots more cool questions coming up right after this on Catholic Answers Live. This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns its attention to the question of God in an age of unbelief. Join us September 21st through 24th in San Diego for I Believe in God, featuring very special guest Scott Hahn and an all-star lineup of speakers. Spend 4 fun days with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. Seats are still available, but going fast. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 and register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
In These 12, The Gospel Through the Apostles' Eyes, best-selling author Rod Bennett gives a riveting re-examination of gospel events from the ground floor perspective of Christ's own hand-picked successors. In his trademark storytelling style, Bennett movingly depicts what it was like for the apostles to witness Jesus' teaching and miracles up close. Why did he call them, and what did he intend for them to do? Order your copy of These 12 today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. A little bit of groovy music for a Thursday afternoon when Jimmy's here doing open forum. I didn't want to say anything before. I was afraid Darren might have forgotten, and I did not want to draw attention to it. But nope, Darren didn't forget. There's a little bit of groovy music for you. Today's open forum is of the internet variety. All the questions have come from the internet. Jimmy Akin, here to answer the internet's questions. And on we go. Here's a nice, easy one. This is a nice, easy question. Erwin asks, how does God answer our prayers? He adds, how do Matthew chapter 21, verse 22, and Mark chapter 11, verse 24 come into play? Thank you very much, Jimmy Akin. Smiley face, smiley face.
So how does God answer our prayers is a question that could be taken in a number of different senses, but by the context of Matthew 21:22 and Mark 11:24, I think that points us in the direction of what Erwin is after. If you look up Matthew 21:22 and Mark 11:24, they're passages in which Jesus is encouraging people to pray, and he's basically being very positive about it. In the Mark passage, he says, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours." And then in the Matthew passage, he says, whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. So these are very positive exhortations. They are clearly designed to encourage people to pray and to have faith in God. Now, we've all had the experience, though, of praying for something and not receiving it. And so there is a question of how do we explain when we pray for something and we're trusting God to give it to us, so we have faith in him, and we don't receive it. How are we to explain that in light of these passages? And I think that's what Erwin is actually concerned about here. How do these fit with our Christian experience of not being able to make ourselves all trillionaires who are immortal and lived in air-conditioned luxury every minute of our lives just by asking God, And so I think that the answer is these statements are meant to be encouraging, and they're meant to encourage us to pray, but Jesus is not expecting us to camp out on them as if they were absolutes and there were no other factors that were relevant. And I don't think the authors of the Gospels were expecting that either, because the authors of the Gospel had the same experience as the rest of us. You don't always get what you ask. And they knew that, and they included these passages anyway. And so I think they expect us to read these passages, not just in light of our Christian experience, but in light of the other passages in the Gospels that they wrote. And one of the things that is in all three of the Synoptic Gospels is the Garden of Gethsemane. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prays to his Father. Psychelet, does God give Jesus what he asks for?
He does not.
He does not. And Jesus also submits his prayer to God's will. He says, nevertheless, not my will be done, but your will be done. And that is a major moment in the Gospels, and the evangelists expect us to know about it because they wrote it, and they expect us to read these other passages about prayer in light of everything we know from the Gospels, including Jesus's experience in the Garden of Gethsemane. So God can say no. That Garden of Gethsemane passage teaches us God can say no on the grounds that it is not God's will in a particular case. So we need to balance the positive exhortation that we find in Matthew 21 and Mark 11 by the fact that it may not be God's will to grant a particular request, as we see in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is, if I recall correctly, in Matthew 26 and Mark 14. So just a few chapters side of that encouragement to pray.
All right. Erwin, thank you very much for the question and for the two smiley faces for Jimmy. Brian asks this: what is hardness of heart? When it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart, what did it mean? How does it tie into Judas's decision? How does it tie into our spiritual growth today?
Okay, so hardness of heart is a phrase that refers to determination. Hypothetically, it can be used in a good sense, like I've hardened my heart to go down to the soup kitchen and serve the poor tonight. Well, that would be a good thing. And if I'm really determined to go do that, I could say, well, I've hardened my heart to do that. But that's not the way it's normally used. Normally, it's referring to someone who's doing something bad. And so we read about Pharaoh hardening his heart against letting the Israelites go. And we read about the Israelites having a hard heart and a stiff neck that would cause them to resist obeying God's law. And generally, when the term hardness of heart is used, it's referring to the condition of a determination to do something bad. And so when it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, that can be understood in more than one sense. One of the ways that it could be understood is God literally did that. Pharaoh had a pliant heart and initially, and God decided, no, I want Pharaoh to do something bad. So I'm going to override Pharaoh's free will and make him determined to do something bad. But most people don't think that's literally what happened, because if God determined that Pharaoh would do something bad, do something sinful, and overrode his free will, who's responsible for that act of evil, Psychelet?
Oh, God would clearly be responsible in that instance. Yeah, overriding someone's will.
God
you have
would
the power
be responsible.
Didn't I say God, or did I say Pharaoh?
Yeah.
Oh, I meant to say God. Yes, God would be responsible.
Yeah. Right. And since God is all good, most people would conclude, okay, this isn't meant in a fully literal sense. A better way to take it is that God allowed Pharaoh's heart to become hard. And we have an earlier indication in the text of Pharaoh hardening his own heart. But because of the idiom that biblical authors at the time that Exodus was written used, they tend to speak in a way that it just attributes everything to God. So if something happens, God did it. And they don't go into did he actually do it, or did he just allow it to happen? But it would seem that, to my mind, the better way to take that passage is God allowed Pharaoh to harden his heart. When it comes to Judas, we have some indication it was more than just Judas that was involved there. We're told more than once in the Gospels that the devil entered Judas and caused him to betray Jesus, and so there was demonic involvement. That doesn't mean he was possessed and not in control of himself. It seems that he was in control of himself, because after he has betrayed Jesus, he repents in Matthew and says, I have betrayed innocent blood. And so he feels guilty for what he did. And so this doesn't look like a case of full-blown possession. Instead, it looks like a case of demonic influence in a way that did not override Judas's free will. But at least at a certain point, Judas had a heart that was hard enough to betray Jesus, and he did so. We can speculate on why, but he did seem to freely choose to betray Jesus. Now, even though there was demonic influence in that decision. Now, how does all this tie in to our spiritual growth today? Well, today we have a choice, just like people in the Bible did. We can either harden our heart against God's will and resist doing what he wants us to, which will ultimately result in our own unhappiness, because what God wants us to do will benefit us in the long run. Or we can have a heart that's compliant, that goes along with what God wants us to do, and therefore, there's the saying in the Old Testament, if today you hear his voice, harden not your heart. So we should be attentive to what God says and what he wants us to do, his moral law. And we should be willing to go along with that, because it's ultimately for our own good. So we should not harden our hearts as part of not if we want to spiritually grow today.
Brian, thank you for the question. That brings us to our break. We'll be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization Online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Isn't it awesome that we today do not recognize his presence in the Eucharist? Is it because we really don't go to him in humbleness of heart and say, Lord, I don't believe, help my unbelief. Lord, I want to see you. I want to recognize you. I cannot live without you. Are we saying that?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it is an internet open forum today. All of our questions have already gotten to us via the internet, and we've gathered them up here, and Jimmy is answering them. The inexhaustible internet, and this one comes from Jonathan.
Insatiable internet.
In fact, indeed, right. And now you don't even know who you're talking to. These questions could be coming from an artificial intelligence. Well, maybe not. I don't know actually how that works. I may have exaggerated what they could do. Jonathan asks this. I'm going to just go with, I'm assuming on the basis of all other evidence that Jonathan is a human being. How can we have a better time converting Muslims?
I assume that Jonathan means how can we more effectively convert Muslims? And there's a lot that's already being done in that regard. One of the things that is not a lot of people aren't really aware of is that many in historically Muslim countries actually are attracted to Christianity. And there are a lot of secret Christians in Muslim countries. In fact, it's even reported that in some Muslim regions, there has been a wave of Jesus appearing to people in dreams, telling them they need to become his followers. And you have a large group of hidden Christians within the Muslim community that keep their faith on the down low because in some areas they can give you varying degrees of persecution up to and including death if you leave Islam. And so just like Christians often had to keep their faith on the down low during the Roman persecution period, there are Christians who are keeping their faith on the down low during the current Muslim persecution period in some countries, not in other countries. There are also Muslims who are intellectually curious about the Christian faith. One of the things that I think is important in all evangelization is being a loving person. There are various voices in the Muslim community that are very strident and that are very hostile towards outsiders. And there are Muslim apologists who are like that. And it can be very easy to respond in kind. If someone's being a jerk, it's easy to be a jerk back to them. But ultimately, that's not winning. If you want to come across as strong, but strong does not mean a jerk. You can come across as strong and someone who's not threatened. So, for example, if I were debating a Muslim apologist, I would do my best to, be friendly and confident. And even if he gets hostile, I'm going to be friendly and confident because that's my goal anyway, because friendly and confident are winning. They convey a better impression. They convey, I'm not a jerk. They convey, that's what the friendliness does. And they convey, I'm not threatened by this, which is what the confidence does. And so being friendly and confident, whether you're in a formal debate or whether you're talking to someone, is important. Also, responding, and this is true of other situations, but responding to a person's actual concerns is important. Years ago, after the internet first became commercially available, I got an email from someone in a Muslim country. And the person, I remember the email, the subject line of the email was, "My heart is searching for God." And what this person wanted to know about was the Christian view of women. Could I explain how Christianity views women? And this is not a standard apologetic topic. Standard is like existence of God, resurrection of Jesus, stuff like that. But that's not what this person was concerned about at the moment. Now, it turns out she was raised in a Muslim society, so she knew from experience how women are treated in a Muslim society. But then she went to America for college, and she saw how women are treated in a predominantly Christian society. And she wanted to know more about that. She wanted to understand it. What exactly is the Christian view of women, and why are they treated the way they are in Christian circles? And she was very impressed by how women were treated in Christian circles compared to how they were treated in Muslim circles. And that was attracting her to the Christian faith. And so, in order to be a good apologist, I answered her question. I didn't start reading her a bunch of arguments for God's existence or Jesus's resurrection or critiques of the Prophet Muhammad. I answered her actual concern. And I think being friendly and confident and answering people's actual concerns will cause us to have a better time, or in other words, be more efficient converting anybody, including Muslims.
Thank you so much for the question. I really actually very much appreciate that question, Jonathan, about sharing the good news and the answer that it solicited. So thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm going to go to a question from PL. Hi, Jimmy. I recently spoke with an atheist, and he asked me, why the Christian God?
Well, if an atheist asked me that, I guess one of my first temptations would be to say it's not the Christian God. If what I believe is true, he's the God of everybody. So it's not like we've got a pantheon up there of the Jewish God and the Christian God and the Muslim God and the Shinto God and the Buddhist God, and we got to pick from among this pantheon whose God are we going to be followers of. If what I believe about God is true, then there's one ultimate God, and he's the God of everybody, not just Christians. He's also the God of Jews and Muslims and every single human being, whether they know about him or not. And so I would say that that what we can talk about is, well, so why should I believe that God is like what you say? And there are various philosophical arguments that can be proposed that illustrate aspects of what God is like from the Christian point of view. For example, if you read the first part of St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologia, he's got extensive arguments for trying to prove God has different attributes. So from the fact, like one of them is God is simple, meaning he's not made of parts. And once you've got that, you can then try to deduce, okay, well, if he doesn't have any parts, then he's not extended space, doesn't have a physical body, at least apart from the incarnation. So he's an immaterial spirit. Also, he's not going to have parts that are extended in time. So he's going to be eternal. He's going to be outside of time. And he'll deduce that he's omnipotent and he has personal agency and all kinds of different things. And so there are various philosophical arguments that you can use, not a single argument, but a collection of arguments that you can use to try to establish different aspects of the Christian belief about God. At some point, though, you want to make the connection to biblical revelation, because there are things about God, like the fact God is a Trinity and that God became incarnate as Jesus Christ, that cannot be deduced philosophically. You need to appeal to empirical data, what's been revealed in the course of world history. And so there are different ways of arguing for the credibility of the Christian message on these grounds. One way is by talking about the reliability of the New Testament, but a very common way in apologetics is talking about the resurrection of Christ, because something needs to explain the early Christian reports of Jesus's resurrection. And you can make a list of different possibilities. It's just like in any paranormal or supernatural investigation. You want to consider the natural explanations first. But if the natural explanations don't end up working, if they're not plausible on their own, then that points you in the direction of a paranormal or supernatural explanation. So you make a list of all the things that could explain the different aspects of the Christian message. You know, Jesus was crucified, died, he was buried, he was seen alive again after ascended into heaven. And you try to say what could explain these different parts of the Christian truth claim. The natural explanations are all very implausible. And that gives us reason to propose a paranormal or supernatural in this nation. And so between using philosophical argument about certain aspects of God, we also would want to appeal to divine revelation as illustrated and by the resurrection of Christ for evidence. And in those ways, we can flesh out the Christian understanding of God and why we have reason to.
PL, I'm going to say thanks very much for that question. And this next question is long, so I'm going to read it real quick to try to give you as much time as I can, Jimmy. This comes from Gabriel. Gabriel asks, can future popes keep going back and forth writing motu proprios that abrogate another motu proprio, then the next pope abrogates that motu proprio, then the next pope abrogates that one? For example, Pope Benedict XVI's motu proprio Summorum Pontificum on the extraordinary form of the Latin Mass liturgy, and Pope Francis's motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, going backwards on the TLM, and let's say a pope after Francis writes a motu proprio making it accessible again, and then the next pope, and it goes back and forth. Could that happen? And then what does that mean if it did?
Could it happen? Yes, it could happen, because popes have free will and they don't all share the same views. And so they can revise aspects of church law. And we've seen, Pope Benedict revised an aspect of church law in regard to the traditional Latin Mass. Pope Francis made another modification, and a future pope can make further modifications. If it did, well, it means that the popes had different views, or at least came to have different views about the best way to handle a situation. And so they thought it was worth implementing a new solution and trying it and see if it accomplishes what they wanted. It doesn't have any doctrinal significance in that, because this is just a matter of ecclesiastical law. It is not a matter of divine law. Divine law does not say, thou must or must not worship according to the traditional Latin Mass. The traditional Latin Mass is a legitimate way of celebrating the liturgy, but so are other forms, like the Chaldean Rite and the Maronite Rite and the post-Vatican II Rite. All of those are legitimate ways of celebrating the liturgy. None of them are divinely mandated, and therefore there's no particular doctrinal significance to what a pope might mandate in this regard. It's just his pastoral judgment about what will serve the church best in a particular situation. And he may be right, he may be wrong, but it doesn't go beyond that.
Gabriel, thanks very, very much for that question. I think I will leave it there because we are just about at the end. Jimmy Akin, our guest. We'll have Jimmy back again tomorrow. Is that right, Darren? We'll have Jimmy back again tomorrow. We'll do some weird questions with Jimmy Akin, have more fun. And while we're on our way out, I will invite you again to come to our conference in September, the last full weekend in September, the 21st through the 24th. We're going to gather here in San Diego. Scott Hahn will be there as a speaker. Jimmy will be one of our speakers. Sister Regina Marie Gorman will be our keynote speaker. Dale Ahlquist will be there. Lots and lots of others. And we're going to talk about God. I Believe in God is the name of the conference. If that is of interest to you, check it out at CatholicAnswersConference.com. And if you decide to come, use the promo code EARLY, and then you will save $50 off your conference ticket. Jimmy Akin, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow to do this again.
My pleasure.
And that does it for us. Again, you can check out Jimmy at Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, or just do the word mysterious.fm, mysterious.fm. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.